Welcome into another episode of Preacher in the Hat. My name is Eric, and fellas, we've done it again.
Yeah, we have.
We got a fourth person in the studio for the third time. This one is none other than our good friend, Mr. Ron Burt. Ron Burt!
Oh my goodness. Taking it to a whole different level.
Yeah, that's what they say.
We're going through a whole
If you don't know,
door.
now you know.
If you don't know, you got to yell his name. So if you're listening in the car right now, yell Ron Burt at the top of your lungs.
That's right.
But so we have been discussing, or over a period of time here. This is going to call back several episodes ago when we were when we talked about streetlights. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to give you if you're listening right now, I'm not going to give you too much context. If you don't know our streetlights episode, I'm going to ask you to hit pause right now. Go to preacherinthehat.com and find that streetlights episode.
Rewind.
Give that a watch. Give that a listen. But yeah, we've got all that stuff out there for you so that you can find our Streetlights episode. This is continuing our testimonials for Streetlights, and that's why we got Mr. Ron Burt in here with us.
Yep.
You also heard our testimonials with Greg Leday. You can find that episode out there as well. But that's what we're here to do today. So Ron, thanks so much for being here with us.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So I got a question for you as we get started, and I didn't tell anybody I was going to ask this. One of the first episodes that we did, it wasn't the first, it was the second episode that we did. We did an episode called Church in the Wildwood. And we came from a song that was sung on the Andy Griffith Show.
That's right.
And word on the street has it that you are a big fan of the Andy Griffith Show.
Grew up on it, cut my teeth on Andy and Otis.
So,
Otis Campbell.
Yeah. So I need you to tell everybody what you did one time because of how bad you wanted to live in Mayberry.
Oh my goodness, this is a setup.
Yeah.
You got a lot of your dad in you.
Yeah.
Can't say anything. 11 or 12. I don't know. I wasn't too bright a kid. I actually believe that Mayberry was a real place. You know, you grew up watching it so much, and I just loved Andy, and I said, man, tired of home, so I packed up my turtle.
Let's just keep going.
It's gonna be a long night. It's gonna be a long night.
That'll be a long story.
I don't know, peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and I actually wrote left a note for Mom, and I was running away from home. I don't know what happened, but traumatized. And
you were like living in New York at this
I was living in New York, and
You-
I caught the subway.
Do you know which way you went?
Had no idea, east, west, north, or south. I actually played hooky from school.
You did the whole
I was leaving out of the house. I left a note, and I was headed for Mayberry. And I got on the subway train.
And you made it all the way.
This is embarrassing, man. And here I am in the train, and they're business people, and they're seeing this little kid who shouldn't be on the train, right? And they're looking at me, and I don't know, I lied through my teeth, told them I was lost, I don't know what. And I got off the train, and I went as far as I could go, and I said, let me get out here and get some fresh air. I got out, walked Midtown Manhattan. I'm like,
Midtown Manhattan. From where? Where in New York? Where else did you come from?
Queens.
From Queens to Midtown.
No, I'm sorry. We were living in the South Bronx then. South Bronx, going to Manhattan, 30-something miles.
Okay.
And we're on the ground. I come out, and in my mind, I think I'm going to go.
This is Mayberry.
You're like, well, I'm here.
Looks a little different, did it?
And I'm looking, and there I am, and I wandered, and there I saw the Empire State Building. The reason I knew it was this big plaque that said Empire State Building. I said, oh, that's where King Kong came down.
Yeah.
And I'm looking up, and I realized you were lost, and you ain't too bright. So I made my way back into the tunnel and got back home and was able to get a hold of that note before Mom saw it.
Oh, wow.
It was short-lived.
How about that?
Did the turtle make it back all right?
The turtle made it back in the sandwich.
And the sandwich too.
Didn't even get to the sandwich.
Didn't get, and then I found out later on in life that Mayberry didn't exist. You know, I ain't never saw any black folks in Mayberry. No,
You were gonna be the first black guy.
I was going to integrate. You know, I was going to knock on the door. Aunt B.
I'm your nephew.
I watched a lot of TV. I guess.
Yeah, right.
I still do. Yeah,
That's pretty cool.
Well,
That was
yeah.
a moment. That was.
Well,
a moment.
I don't want to pry too much more of that stuff out of you. I'm gonna let you. We're gonna let you get to the good stuff that you actually came to share.
Man.
Tonight, but like I said, we really appreciate you being on with us. Dad, I'm gonna pass it over to you to, so we get this thing started for real this time. Don't worry, for real this time.
So, like, when I think about streetlights,
Right.
you know, I'm thinking about a little country town in South Georgia. When Ron and I talk about streetlights and, you know, childhood, boy, it's a different
It's a little bit
experience.
different.
It's a little
Big
bit different.
difference.
And so, Ron, talk about your experience with streetlights and where you grew up. When you remember the streetlights the most, you were living where?
In the South Bronx.
In the South Bronx. Okay, cool.
Melrose House.
So paint the picture. You're
Yeah.
good at it. Paint the picture, and let's talk about streetlights and you growing up.
Melrose Projects.
The projects.
Yeah, my brother and I, big difference from here when you talk about housing projects. The Melrose Projects, it was, let me see, it was 8 buildings and roughly 2,400, maybe 3,000 people. Wow. You can imagine 1,000 apartments somewhere around there. So I think it was 8 apartments on each floor. And we
How many
lived
floors? How high?
14 stories.
14 stories.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's where we grew up. It's the projects then were a little different. It was the violence and all those things hadn't reached the South Bronx. It was a mixture of German, Irish, Hispanic, Puerto Ricans, and African Americans, Italians. Excuse me, Italians. A lot of mafia stuff going on. We were right down from Little Italy. You could actually walk to Yankee Stadium.
Wow.
Where we lived at, and we were flanked by 2 other housing projects, the Patterson Projects and Jackson Houses. And so you can imagine, there's a lot of kids.
That's a ton, yeah.
You say something like 1,000 maybe?
Roughly about 1,000, because I think a housing project, I think we topped out about 3,000. 3,000, adults
total.
and children, yeah. So, and we had our own police department, and own parks.
So who'd you live with there?
With Mom.
With Mom?
Grandmama, and Dad. He was kind of transit here and there. He was around.
Now you had how many brothers? You had one brother?
3. It was 2 of us.
2. Okay.
All total 3. Ricky, Ronnie, of course, and Morris, my younger brother.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's what we grew up. I mean, that's all we knew was a housing project, lived there. And we were talking. I remember when you did a podcast on the streetlights, and that was the thing. We had to be in when the streetlights came on.
Yeah.
And that was a story within itself because
Let's hear it.
we lived on the 7th floor. And when Mom said, "I want you home before the streetlights came on," she announced it. You can't imagine. These buildings were like a U shape, like a horseshoe.
Okay.
The park was behind the front. So in order for Mom to get our attention, she would yell out of the window from the 7th floor.
I bet it carried too.
In more ways than one. She would yell, and it was an echo
Like what did it sound like?
She started from Ricky, Ronnie, Morris, or she would change it up, Ronnie, Ricky, Morris. But it was a human echo, because what would happen was whoever heard it would carry it. Ricky, Ronnie, Morris, your mama calling you. And it would go from one individual to another, and it would just it would just rise up, and you got everybody calling your name, Ricky, Ronnie, Morris. And we're running home, right?
Yeah.
You got to run because you're embarrassed, because mama is calling you.
People won't stop
and
saying your name.
Everybody won't stop saying your name, and you're humiliated. You're going into the building. You're trying not to run. If she started with Ricky, that was fine. And Marsh, I knew I was coming next. You just take off running. And you tried to be cool, because here you are talking to a girl, right? And mama's yelling, and everybody else is following, and you're trying to be cool, and you're kind of walking and not running, and then they're yelling in your ear, Ricky, Ronnie. And you got your head down, and you're just kind of bowed down, and it was just so humiliating. And I look back at it, it was just, mom was like that, you had to be home before the streetlights came on, and you didn't even get on the elevator because
you just ran up the stairs.
Because you're embarrassed. So what you did, you ran up the flight of stairs, and you never questioned it, And it wasn't just our family; it was others, but it was this streetlight thing. You had to be in the house when the streetlights came on, and we never questioned it. It got to the place, I think, when we didn't want to hear it anymore, but, that's how mom was.
Yeah.
And that's how it was going to be. So we grew to understand that was the curfew for us. And this was the summertime.
Sure.
We weren't kids that went out during the week. It was the summertime. And I look back at it now, and I think if you mention be at home before the streetlights come on, kids wouldn't even know what you're talking about.
That's right.
They wouldn't have
Well, I remember we asked the question when we were first talking about, was that just something that they did for TV, or that was actually a thing? And Dad was like, no, that was actually
thing.
that was legit a thing.
Yeah.
That was the clock.
Yeah.
That was we didn't have any watches. Who needed it? All you had was mom. And
nobody texting you when to.
Where are you?
Where are you? But with that, I was so humiliated. By 12, 13 years old, and mom's still telling you to be home, but you had to be home, and that was it.
I think
for dinner.
The funny part here, though, is that you were talking about how so many people were, yelling your name or whatever, and the very first thing Eric did to open the podcast was yell your name. We didn't have.
My bad.
We didn't, I hope that wasn't triggering for him.
Flashback.
Flashback. But that's how we did it back then. And you had to be in. You didn't question it. Dinner's going to be ready. And
what I love about this story too is that a lot of times when we think about the streetlight thing, they do romanticize it. You ask it whether it was a really thing, but they kind of romanticize it sometimes, like, oh, the street mother's calling you home. Come home. It's supper time, and it sounds like a really pleasant experience.
It wasn't.
It wasn't a pleasant experience for him.
A lot of yelling.
It was like a completely different experience. So it was almost like a warning. It felt more like a warning than it did an invitation, right?
Yeah.
Mom
knew when the lights would come. It was just amazing.
She kind of knew, huh?
And we held out to the last minute.
Like every
There was
kid
no way
does.
you were going to be in there.
You had to be in earshot. You got to understand. And if we didn't hear, you carried it, and you carried it, and it would just go. Everybody's yelling, running.
But I remember as a kid have like the curfew. If it was say it was midnight or whatever, you weren't getting home at 11:45. Like you were going to be out until you were going to get home. Like the door, the time hit.
Maybe.
Yeah. So I know you're like pushing it to the limit.
Yeah.
Well, I think you told me before about a time when about the streetlights thing that you met somebody some years later from your neighborhood.
Yeah.
And let's go there a little bit. Tell us about that experience.
I guess I'm in my late teens, maybe 19, 20. I'm helping mom at the church. She was getting food together, and we were cooking fish or something, and my brother comes by and he says, "Do you know this guy? Remember?" I said, "I don't have an idea who this kid is." He was about my brother's age, my younger brother, and he says, "You gotta know him." He says, "Don't you know me?" I said, "I have no idea who you are." But this time we've moved from the South Bronx to Queens, to the suburbs, which is about 30 miles away. And so he says, "You got to remember me. We lived in the projects together." I said, "I don't remember. I'm grown up, but I got the clothes and the whole swag and everything, So, who's this little kid? You don't know me. I've changed my name or whatever, And he says, "You got to remember. I remember you. Your mother used to yell out of the window." Oh, man.
Talking about flashback.
I'm looking at this guy, and all of a sudden it's coming. This is post-traumatic. He says, "Your mother used to call you guys out all the time. Don't you remember? Ronnie, Rick." And I'm like, oh, my goodness. Yeah. And then he looked at me. He says, "Yeah, your mother always yelled and got you guys to come in, and you guys couldn't even hang out with us." And I'm looking at him. I'm saying, "Oh, why is this kid bringing this to me?" And he says, "Your mother really loved you." And I'm looking at him like, "What?" He says, "Man, you didn't eat at everybody's house, and your mother never let you spend the night at this one's house." And he says, "Your mother loved you. She loved y'all because she called y'all in. We could stay out as long as we wanted, but you guys had to come in, and your mom really loved you."
Let's just stay there for a moment.
Yeah.
Wow.
And here I'm thinking,
your mama really loved you, and
yeah,
it didn't feel like that at the time, did it?
It didn't. Nah, Steve.
It didn't feel like that at the time.
I mean,
when he told you that, what was your response?
I didn't say anything because we came from a household where the word love wasn't used.
Oh, okay.
Mom did very loving things, but that word was alien.
Mm-hmm.
She displayed it.
Yeah.
But I never heard it, you guys. Mm-hmm. So for him to say that, all the strictness and the routine and everything that Mom did, because, made us go to church, this and that, where other kids were out there hanging out. We were in the Boy Scouts and Explorers and all of those activities. Summertime.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that. What'd you have to do when you had your uniform on in that neighborhood?
Yeah, it was rough when, we wanted to be in the Boy Scouts, and we had a community center right there in the housing projects. So they had a scout leader and everything, but that was considered soft and sissy stuff. Yeah. So we had our hiking backpacks. We weren't going on a hike, but we would actually take our uniforms, our scouts outfits, and put them in the backpack and have our street clothes on. So we'd go out through the back so guys wouldn't see us, and then get to the communities. It's rough, man. And put the uniforms on when we got to the community center, then take it back off because the guys would razz us, But Mom was, she wanted us around a good, solid role model. And so she put us in that environment.
Was that when he told you that, was it something you reflected on later? Like in the moment where you like, nah, that wasn't really love? Or like, did it really hit you right then when he said your mom loved you, that you realized that that's what it was? Or did it take you like a while to like look back on that?
I think it didn't really hit home, but it was something that I pondered in my head because I realized that it was just the opposite with him because Mom never called them in or Dad called them in. So what I thought was a bad moment, it was a special moment. I thought about it. I didn't equate that with love, but Mom cared about where we ate, and because you couldn't eat at anybody's house. If you weren't hungry, that meant you ate somewhere else, and that's she was very protective of us. So yeah, it took me some time, and you got to understand, in my mother started going to church, and she was really, I don't know what brought her to that place, and we were going to this little Pentecostal church. We had come out of the Baptist church, and now she wants to go to the Pentecostal church, and you guys are talking in tongues, and you're doing all this other stuff, man. And it's like, man, what are we doing here? And, and here again, we had to be there for, Wednesday night Bible study, Friday night evangelistics, and all of this stuff. I remember Mom making Dad go to church. I think that was the first and last time I ever saw him in a church. And I remember him sitting there. And when Dad said something, you did it. I mean, he was a strict disciplinarian. And I remember they had an altar call, like 14 or 15. And I got up, and I remember Dad saying, don't move. And I got up anyway. That was the first time I was ever disobeyed my dad. I heard something, you guys, and I mean, my brothers didn't get up, and nobody else got up. But when they had this altar call, that day I got up. I remember going to the altar, and I don't even remember what I said, but I remember I said, Lord, if this is you, take me, because I was afraid to go back, because Dad was very strict. And I didn't know nothing about the rapture, but
now would be a really
man, that would have been a rapture moment, man.
That would have been a good time for her, right?
I heard
If it's going to happen, why not now?
Yeah.
And I remember going back, and my mom looked at me, and my brothers looked at me, and it was like I looked at Dad, and I sat down, and he didn't touch me. He didn't say anything. It was just like I had this, I can't explain it, but I heard a voice. You know what I'm saying? It's wasn't my mother's voice.
Yeah.
But it was a voice that I heard, and I believe even to the day that a lot of things that my brothers got into, I was kind of a late bloomer. I got into some stuff, but not as much as they did. And I'm talking about in terms of the drug life. And I always go back. I look back at that time I went to the altar when I.
It's almost like that day that in that Pentecostal church you got called home, didn't you?
Yeah.
And didn't even really understand what it meant. Somebody was calling you back then.
Yeah.
Calling you to come on in.
But then the other side was, I think, after we moved away from the streetlights and moved to the suburbs and all that other stuff, we got away from the voice. We moved away, geographically, we moved away from the church. That was our reason of not, because it was I think it was like 2 hours just to get back to to the South Bronx.
Gotcha.
After Mom moved us out. And so that voice, I didn't hear it until I was like 29 years old.
This whole idea about being called home, is... when I think about your story, I think about a story about a guy on death row. Ron, I don't know if I've ever told you this story. His name was Wayne Ritter. He's 27-year-old. He was on death row, and he was executed eventually. But he told me one time, he and I would talk quite a bit. He was a biker growing up, a pretty violent man. But he told me one time, he said, when I was 13 years old, he said, my parents would let me stay out all night. He said, I remember being 13 years old, staying out all night, coming in for breakfast and sitting down at the table, and Dad and Mom, neither one of them said a word.
Wow.
Didn't ask me where I was, didn't care. He said, all the other kids thought I was really cool. They thought I was really cool. He said, but I remember walking in the mall and watching some parents who back then could do this. Guys, y'all won't know this. But he said they would swat their kids on the behind. They would discipline them, bring them in. He said, I remember, Steve, in that mall thinking, man, I just wish my mom and daddy cared enough to swat my behind. He said, everybody else thought it was cool. He said, but I saw that calling, in a sense, if we're using our metaphor here, calling in a sense that just to bring it back. And he said, my parents didn't care enough to call me home. Didn't care enough to discipline me. Didn't do that sort of thing. So apparently that guy in his early 20s or late teens, he saw something like Wayne saw. You know what I'm saying? Like, wow, your parents loved you. And so it sounded strange to me years ago to hear Wayne say, I was 22, 23 years old when he told me that, and I was a chaplain at Holman Prison. And when he told me that, I thought, well, that's kind of a strange thing to long for your parents to discipline you. But he did.
Mm-hmm.
He
I
did.
think it's even more amazing to me for him to talk about wanting it in that moment.
That's
it's another thing to be looking back on on that memory in the mall and be like, man, you're thinking about all that stuff, the parenting that you saw and thinking, I wish I had that. But he was literally in those moments.
He was
already longing for that.
That's what he told me. He said, I was longing for it. He said, at that age, I would long for it. He said, they all thought I was cool, but I didn't like it. Now, he would have never admitted it, I don't think, to his friends
for sure.
at that point from what he said, because he was the cool kid.
Yeah.
But he said, in that moment, I longed for it. And so, isn't it interesting that how we really long to be called home in different kind of ways, just at, from a young age.
I think when you see it done, when you see... He perceived that clearly. He perceived that discipline as love.
He did,
and care.
He did.
Which is the exact same way. The guy from the projects saw. He perceived what your mom did as love and care.
And I wanted what he had. He wanted what I had.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Like the prodigal son, I think about that, and 15 years later, I hear the voice again, and coming up to a little small storefront church on a corner, and it was just like it all just came back to me. I was coming back home, coming home,
I think, Ron, what's really cool is I know you and I walked beside each other as brothers and friends and fellow ministers for a long time now, probably since 1996. And one of the things I love about this story is I've watched you call your kids home, for years. I've seen you do it in all kinds of ways. I've seen you talk to hundreds. And I know you've talked to thousands, but I've seen you talk to hundreds of men and encourage them to call their children home, just like God called you home, and that God will call them home and God will do it. And so just like your mama called you, really, in some respects, it was the voice of God at an early age for you, Yeah. It feels like, and to watch you now, even though it's time story for another day, but even though Dad was not that person, just like your story represented, he said, don't go up there. And I watched you call hundreds, and I know you've done it with thousands, literally thousands, men, especially here in the Birmingham area, where you've called them back to the Father, Heavenly Father, but you've also encouraged them to call to their children and call their children home. And you've asked them to do that. And that didn't come because you saw a great example of that in your own father. I mean, just like your own story said a little bit ago, where he told you don't go forward, And of course that story with Dad is another story for another day.
Yeah.
But I watched you do that, and to hear the story now of Mom calling you, and this whole idea of streetlights. I've never heard that streetlight story from you, and it puts a lot of stuff in perspective for me in terms of what I've seen you do, because I think it looks to me like God built that stuff into you at an early age, even when you didn't like it. Yeah. He was building something into you didn't even like, in terms of its immediate consequence, but its long-term consequence in your life is recognized by this kid, where he was longing. It sounds like he was longing for his mama to do that.
Yeah.
Just like your mama did.
And it's a lot of work not just on our end, but the long, I guess, play that God was making in your life to break a cycle.
Yeah.
And so many people need, there's so many cycles that need to be broken in our lives, whether it's, a family that has issues with, just something that seems like it's passed down, quote unquote. Yeah. But like the seed that he had to plant in you so early so that you could love your kids in a way that your father didn't, and you could love your grandkids in a way that, your father didn't. To me, that just hits home so much, because that's something that so many families can relate to. And it's not just, it may not be that it was love or something like that. It might be, some cycle of something else. But
here's something y'all don't know. I just thought of, Ron. I was raising you two. Your mom and I were raising you two at the same time he was raising his son, Jonathan, who's right now in Iraq, and a godly young man and so forth. And what y'all don't know is that while that was happening, Ron and I were learning from each other about how to be dads to our sons.
I was learning from you, Steve.
Well,
we would travel down to Atmore, and I would listen to your dad and how he interacted with you guys. You don't know what you don't know, and you don't know what to ask if you don't know. Right. And so I would say, look, I'm not a great father. I didn't say those things, but we would get to talking, and he would say something about how you guys were raised and things that you would do, and it wasn't like he was giving me advice, but I'm saying, okay, that works. And I'd take it home and tell my wife, I said, this is what Steve does with Derek and Eric. You didn't know that.
Well, I didn't.
And I was just kind of like, okay, that sounds good. Let me just say this. let me experiment with this and work with Derek and Eric. Man, it's got to work with Jonathan. And that's how I would learn. I was learning. And, it's like the Ethiopian eunuch when he says, how can I except some man should guide me, because parenting with me was almost like trial and error. I didn't know what to do.
But I think it just goes exactly back to what you were talking about, breaking cycles. Is like that somehow, what the Lord instilled in you was that desire to, because even you could have had all the right intentions and having become a Christian and following the Lord and all that stuff, and still could have been a lazy parent because of the example you got, or something like that. But you were still getting after it to make sure that you raised your kids the way that the Lord wanted you to. And I mean, I just think that's amazing. Just like what you were talking about, cycle breaking, is that you did it in every aspect, and I think that should be that's commended, at least from me, that you would look at something else like that and be like, okay, I got a lot to learn here. It's like, I know I follow Jesus, I know I do all those things, but I still got plenty to learn here. Yeah. And that's an incredible outlook.
But on the other side of the coin, when I got so busy into this fathering thing and being a parent in ministry before the fatherhood program, I was neglecting. I went full forward into one area, and I kind of just took the kids for granted, and I didn't know it. But Jonathan ran away from home. He didn't go to Mayberry.
Bummer.
And it's embarrassing. You're in church and you don't know where your son is, and I literally stayed up all night long. Ricky and I, we literally held each other. How old was he then? Jonathan was 16, maybe. Really? 16. No note. And I got up that night. I said, he's not home. And sure enough, he took off. We didn't know where he was. We were in church, and it was just like, man, can I do this? What did we do? And agonizing reappraisals. What did we do? And I would leave a message on his phone. Son, I love you, and da 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 da. And I love you. wherever you are, just answer the phone. And, you know, he's going to private school. He's in school, and we just couldn't find out where he is. And finally, we I don't know how it was, but he finally answered the phone, and we sat him down and talked to him. And it was the busyness, the things that we were doing. And you miss when I played. I didn't think I missed the football game, but I did. I was doing something, and you missed this, and he started spelling things out. And I said, "Well, son, you're going about a week. It felt like months." And he said, "Dad," he said, "I would have came home the next day." I said, "Well, why didn't you?" He said, "Because you kept leaving them voice messages on the phone. I wanted to hear your voice. Had you not called me, I wouldn't have, you know, I would have came home. But when you kept talking, and I kept hearing your voice in those messages," he said, "I just kept repeating, you know, I kept playing it back, and I just waited for you to leave another message." I said, "Oh, man." You see, with mom never used the word, and dad never used the word love. But every time I felt I was displaying it, but I love you, son, wherever you are, I love you.
So you were saying, you were using the word.
I was using the word.
And now, these two here, I mean, like a chip off the old block. I mean, they're
Do you know the
crazy.
difference between Kuwait, he did in Kuwait or Iraq? It's like 9-10 hours different. So, you know, and he's calling, "Hey, Dad, just saw a desert rat, you know, and 2 camels went by."
And it's not like the brother's not married and got his own kids.
You know,
He's calling Pop.
every twice a day, every day. "Son, could you give me some advice on leadership?" Guy's a captain. He doesn't need me. I think he's got 100 and something people under him. He's asking me for advice. You know, I'm cutting and pasting stuff off of Google. I don't know.
Wikipedia.
Wikipedia.
Have you read John Maxwell?
I send him some John Maxwell stuff, man, and it's 2 or 3 times a day. You know, I want to
Just
pass.
say Jonathan got the same sense of humor he does, so you can imagine what these conversations are.
You gotta have Jonathan here. I mean, sit in, but man, it's,
we ought to have him when he comes back sometime. We ought to have him
he'd be
sit in
glad
sometime.
to.
That'd be a great follow-up.
yeah, we'll throw up that runaway moment.
Yeah, that's right. We could talk about that, couldn't we? Yeah.
My sheep know my voice. A stranger they won't follow. Hearing the voice of God.
But now, I mean, if we want to answer the question if that cycle was broken, we know.
Yeah,
That's right.
Because
It
of that
is.
relationship that you have with your son.
it is. Yeah.
And that he now has with his father and
And also with his daughter, Sharonda.
Yeah.
I mean, look, he's wearing Birmingham Southern dad because his 37-year-old daughter insisted that he display her school colors.
I got her sweatshirts and everything. And the school is going under, right?
yeah, right. I think they
She-
don't sell.
But not before she got her diploma.
We went over to the campus and she just cleaned up everything. I think she bought about $200 and something worth of sweatshirts and hats and everything for me. I'm like, man, kid. And that was a discount, right?
Yeah, that's awesome.
You're right, Derek. The cycle has
Yeah.
completely been broken. And there's a new cycle in play. Thank you, Jesus.
When
That's what Jesus does, right?
the lights come on,
When the
you
lights
come to
on.
yourself.
Yeah.
Those 3 things, you can't. We had to be home before the light came on. We couldn't eat at anybody's house, and we couldn't spend the night at anybody's house. Those are the 3 things.
Because Mama wanted you in a safe place.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what God wants for us.
Home.
He wants us in
Home.
a same place. He wants us home. He wants to be the one to feed us. He wants to be the one for us to sleep. So that's why I can say
Yeah.
that preachers never sleep in. We only lay before the Lord, my brother.
There you go.
So, because he wants us to be home, at home, tucked in and safe. I don't care how old you are. I can be 67 like me and 59 like you, Ron, and he still wants you to be tucked in safe.
It's so funny. Your dad, he can bring out the best in me because we talked a little bit about this, and it never came to mind about that young man
Yeah.
to equate that with love. And he was younger than me, 4 years younger than me, and that's just like I paused for that moment, like, man,
Yeah.
your mama really loved y'all. and to have someone else use that word.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah, and it came all the way back around because, man, Jesus really loves you.
Yeah.
You know,
He'll wait for us to come home. And guess what? He uses a bunch of people to get you to get back.
That's right. That's right.
The echo. There we go.
Yeah,
That's
echo,
good too.
man, you know.
And sometimes he's flipping the lights on.
And he's calling your name, man. Oh man, out loud. Oh my goodness.
Well, we're
Wow,
great. We're
that's
grateful that that you did.
Yeah.
When he called you, you came back in. And Matt or Ron, it's been an incredible pleasure to have you here with us.
Well, big time.
And you know the greatest thing too was my younger brother. He's still in New York, and he listens on Zoom every message. And he's a plumber. You know, he has his own business, and sometimes he's pulling his truck over, and he's listening, or he's working on some project, and he's in. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
And so now I brought him to the Lord, isn't that something?
I love
Amazing.
it.
That's great.
Absolutely love it. Yeah. Well, it's been another good one, and we're glad you were here with us. As always, you can find us on preacherinthehat.com. Give us a visit out there. So for Steve, Derek, Ron Burt,
In the house.
Chris behind the cameras, I'm Eric. This has been Preacher in the Hat. We'll see you next time.
All right.
I'll tip my hat to you.